When billionaire CEO Jonathan Miles walked into the five-star Sapphire Lounge that evening, he thought it was just another quiet dinner. But in less than 10 minutes, 5 armed men would storm through the door. And the only person who would stand between life and death was the restaurant's maid. The maid, Aisha, quietly cleaning in the background, unnoticed, humble, but her eyes are sharp and calm. What no one knew was that this quiet woman carried a secret that would shock the entire city. The sun had barely begun to set over the glittering skyline when Jonathan Miles, the powerful and widely admired billionaire CEO of Miles Tech Industries, arrived at the Sapphire Lounge, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. The restaurant's golden lights reflected off the marble floors, and the sound of a soft jazz tune floated through the air. Every detail of the place spoke of refinement: crystal glasses, polished cutlery, and attendants who seemed to glide silently between tables like dancers in a well-rehearsed ballet. Jonathan walked in with the quiet confidence of a man used to owning every room he entered. Dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal grey suit, his sharp blue eyes scanned the restaurant as though he were assessing a business deal rather than admiring the ambience. Patrons whispered his name under their breath, stealing glances at him with curiosity and admiration. That's Jonathan Miles, the tech billionaire, the youngest CEO in the Fortune 100. He barely noticed. He had lived long enough with wealth and fame to be immune to the awe of others. His life revolved around numbers, deals, and endless meetings that stretched into the night. For Jonathan, this dinner wasn't about pleasure. It was about strategy. He was here to meet Raymond Holt, a potential investor from Singapore, to discuss a merger that could redefine the company's future. As he settled into his private corner table, he checked his watch. 7:32 p.m. Always punctual, he hated waiting. He gestured subtly to a waiter. "A glass of Chateau Margaux 2010, he said, "and make sure the meal is served promptly. I don't want to be here longer than necessary." While the waiter nodded and hurried off, Jonathan's eyes briefly landed on a woman cleaning a nearby table. She wore a simple black Maid uniform with a crisp white apron and her hair tied neatly under a cap. Her name tag read Aisha. She moved with quiet precision, her hands steady, her posture straight, her gaze lowered. She was wiping down the table as though the act itself was sacred, her movements graceful and controlled. Despite her modest position, there was something composed and dignified about her. But Jonathan didn't notice that. To him, she was just another face in the background, one of the many unseen people who made his world run smoothly without ever being acknowledged. Across the room, the restaurant buzzed softly with the murmurs of polite conversation, the clinking of cutlery, and the faint rhythm of a piano playing near the bar. Couples laughed, a group of executives toasted to success, and waiters moved with careful balance, carrying trays of wine and oysters. Everything was perfect, poised, elegant, calm. Yet, somewhere deep inside that calm, a sense of unease flickered, like a shadow waiting for the right moment to move. Aisha felt it before anyone else. She paused mid-motion, her eyes darting to the entrance for a brief second. The doors opened, and 5 men walked in, tall, rough-looking, dressed in plain jackets, their expressions blank but cold. They didn't fit the restaurant's elite atmosphere. One of them glanced toward Jonathan's table, and though it lasted only a heartbeat, Aisha noticed it. Her instincts told her something wasn't right. For most people, it would have been a passing thought. Maybe they were delivery workers, or perhaps guests who had wandered in by mistake. But Aisha's breathing slowed as her mind began to analyze. Their walking formation, their scanning eyes, the bulge under one man's jacket, it wasn't a wallet. Her hand tightened around the cleaning cloth. For the first time that evening, Jonathan noticed her face. She wasn't just a maid anymore. Her eyes, dark and steady, carried a look of quiet alertness, something almost military. She quickly lowered her gaze when she saw him looking. The billionaire turned back to his phone, unaware of how close danger was creeping toward him. Meanwhile, Aisha continued her work silently, but every sense in her body was awake now. She watched the reflection of the men in the glass window, counting their steps. Her mind, once trained for precision and combat, began to map the restaurant's layout, exits, distances, obstacles, and potential weapons. To everyone else, the evening was unfolding like any other. Fine dining, expensive laughter, clinking glasses. But for Aisha, the air had shifted. The tension was invisible, but it was there. And in that perfect restaurant filled with the city's elite, only one woman knew what was about to happen. The storm was seconds away. The restaurant clock ticked softly, 7:46 p.m. The faint jazz melody played on, soothing and elegant. But beneath that melody, something sinister was moving closer. The 5 men who had entered minutes earlier took seats across the restaurant. They didn't order. They didn't speak to the waiters. Instead, they exchanged brief, wordless glances. Sharp, rehearsed signals known only to those who had done this before. Aisha was now cleaning near the far wall, her back half turned, but her eyes fixed on the mirror that reflected their movements. Her heartbeat was steady, her expression calm. She'd seen men like this before, disciplined, calculated, dangerous. One of the men reached under his jacket. Aisha's stomach tightened. She knew that movement, and then it happened. The first gunshot shattered the calm like thunder ripping through glass. The music stopped. Screams erupted. People dove under tables, glasses crashed, and the pianist froze mid-note. Jonathan Miles turned sharply, his chair tipping over as he ducked behind the table. His heart pounded in his chest as chaos swallowed the elegant room. "Everybody down!" one of the attackers barked, his voice deep, commanding. Another man pointed his weapon toward the counter, shattering a bottle of wine with a single shot. The red liquid splattered across the marble like blood. "Where's Jonathan Miles?" the leader shouted. His eyes burned with rage. "Come out, billionaire boy! We've been waiting for this!" Jonathan froze, his mind racing. Why me? Who are they? He could feel every heartbeat in his chest echoing like a drum. Aisha crouched behind a serving cart, her breathing quiet and deliberate. Her mind shifted gears, no longer that of a maid, but that of a trained operative. The calmness in her veins returned, a state she hadn't entered in years. 5 men, 2 armed with pistols, 1 guarding the entrance, 1 moving toward the bar, leader near the center. Distance, 6 meters. Time, seconds. While everyone else cowered in fear, Aisha studied the rhythm of their movement. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. The woman screamed, trembling. Jonathan clenched his fists about to stand, but then froze again. He was helpless. Aisha made her decision. She reached for the heavy metal serving tray beside her. Her fingers curled around it, remembering old reflexes, the weight, the angle, the timing. In combat, hesitation kills. When the attacker turned his back for half a second, she moved. The tray flew through the air with a sharp clang. It hit the man's wrist, knocking the gun from his hand. He howled in pain, spinning around. Too slow. Aisha was already there. The man fell to the ground, gasping for air. Everyone froze. For a brief moment, even the attackers seemed stunned. A maid had just taken down one of their own. "What the? Who is she?" one of them shouted. Aisha said nothing. Her eyes were cold now, sharp as blades. Another man rushed her with a knife, but she sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and slammed his head against a marble column. He dropped instantly. The metallic clang of the knife echoed as it hit the floor. Jonathan watched from behind the table, speechless. He had never seen anyone move like that, precise, controlled, fearless. The leader growled, raising his gun. "You picked the wrong night, lady." Aisha grabbed a chair and flung it with calculated force. It struck his arm, the bullet going wide, smashing a chandelier instead of her chest. Shards of crystal rained down in a glittering storm. People gasped, crawling for cover. Aisha rolled behind another table, her mind racing. She spotted a silver fork on the ground. In one swift motion, she flicked it. It hit a switch, triggering a steam pipe in the kitchen area. A burst of hot vapor filled part of the room, clouding visibility. In that confusion, she moved like a shadow. Silent, deadly. The next man didn't even see her coming until she wrapped a cloth around his neck and pulled him backward. His gun clattered away as he fell unconscious. The remaining two panicked. "Boss, we need to get out of here!" one yelled, but it was too late. Aisha kicked a fallen pistol across the floor, sending it spinning toward Jonathan's table. She crouched low beside him. "Can you use it?" she whispered. Jonathan stared at her, wide-eyed. You're not just a maid, are you?" Her expression didn't change. "Not tonight, sir." Before he could respond, she stood again. One of the last attackers fired blindly through the steam. The bullet grazed her arm, tearing her sleeve, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she grabbed a wine bottle, smashed it, and used the jagged edge as a weapon. Two swift moves, one strike to the wrist, one to the chest, and the attacker was down. The leader, furious and desperate, charged at her with a roar. They struggled briefly, his strength against her technique. He pushed her toward a wall, but Aisha twisted, using his momentum to throw him over her shoulder and pin him to the floor. The restaurant fell silent, except for his groans and the soft sound of shattered glass crunching underfoot. Aisha stood over him, calm and unshaken, her hair slightly undone, her chest rising with measured breaths. She kicked his weapon away and stepped back as police sirens wailed in the distance. Jonathan slowly rose from behind the table, his face pale with disbelief. He looked around at the unconscious men sprawled across the floor, 5 of them, each taken down by the woman he had barely noticed an hour ago. Who are you?" he finally asked, his voice trembling with awe. Aisha looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Someone who's been trying to forget who she used to be." And with that, she quietly picked up her cleaning cloth again, as though nothing had happened, as though the maid had simply returned to her duty. But for everyone watching that night, nothing would ever feel ordinary again. The wail of sirens grew louder, echoing through the streets outside the Sapphire Lounge. Red and blue lights began to flash against the restaurant's shattered windows. Inside, chaos slowly gave way to disbelief. Guests huddled together, whispering. Waiters helped the injured. The once luxurious dining hall was now a battlefield. Overturned tables, broken glass, and the lingering scent of gunpowder. Amid the wreckage stood Aisha, the woman no one had ever truly seen before that night. Her maid's uniform was torn, her sleeve blood-stained where the bullet had grazed her arm. But her eyes, calm, deep, unwavering, told a story of a woman who had faced worse. Police officers stormed in, weapons drawn. "Freeze! Hands where we can see them!" Aisha slowly raised her hands, her movements deliberate, steady. The officers looked around, confusion spreading, as they realized she wasn't one of the attackers. She was the one who had stopped them. Several guests began to speak at once. "She saved us." "That woman! She fought them all by herself!" It was unbelievable. Jonathan Miles stepped forward, still shaken, his suit rumpled and his expression filled with awe. "Officer, she's not one of them," he said firmly. "She saved my life, and probably everyone else's in here." The police lowered their weapons, moving toward the unconscious men sprawled across the floor. As they cuffed them, the restaurant's manager, trembling, approached Aisha. "Aisha, I don't understand. How did you do all that?" Aisha looked at him quietly. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of experience. "Reflex, I suppose. Old habits die hard." Jonathan frowned slightly. "Old habits?" Her gaze met his, strong, composed, yet distant. "I used to work in protection, a long time ago." The restaurant had been cleared. Statements were taken. The 5 attackers, bruised and handcuffed, were loaded into police vans. The motive behind the attack was still under investigation, but for Jonathan Miles, only one question mattered. Who was Aisha? He found her sitting quietly on a wooden bench outside the police station, a simple white bandage wrapped around her arm. The night air was cold, but she seemed lost in her thoughts, staring at the streetlights as if they were distant memories. Jonathan approached slowly, unsure how to begin. "Aisha," he said softly. She looked up, polite but reserved. "Mr. Miles, you saved my life," he said, "and I still don't understand how someone like you, someone so calm, so precise, ends up cleaning tables for a living." A faint smile touched her lips, the kind that hides pain rather than joy. "Because sometimes, Mr. Miles, peace comes at a cost, and some of us pay by living quietly." Jonathan sat beside her. "Tell me the truth, please." Aisha hesitated, glancing away. The city hummed in the distance, the sound of traffic, sirens, and faint laughter from a nearby cafe. Finally she spoke, her tone low and heavy. "I was a special forces operative. I served for 8 years. My team specialized in urban hostage rescue and counter-terror operations. We were trained to move fast, think faster, and protect civilians at any cost." Jonathan listened in silence, stunned. "We were called the Ghost Unit because we were never supposed to be seen. We worked behind the scenes. No credit, no recognition, only results." Her eyes grew distant, her voice softer. 5 years ago, during an extraction mission in a war-torn region, my husband, who was also part of my unit, was killed. We were ambushed. I made it out alive, but I lost more than him that day. I lost the will to keep fighting." She looked down at her hands, steady, scarred, capable. "So I left the service. I wanted to start over. I didn't want medals or missions. I just wanted quiet. A friend told me about a job at this restaurant. Cleaning tables felt peaceful, predictable, no surprises. For once, I thought I could live like an ordinary person." Jonathan exhaled slowly, processing every word. The woman before him, someone he had once dismissed as invisible, had risked her life countless times before ever meeting him. "And yet," he said, "when danger came back to find you, you didn't hesitate." She looked at him with a calm sadness. "Instinct. You don't unlearn that. You just bury it until the moment life demands it again." A young officer stepped out of the building holding a clipboard. "Ms. Aisha," he said, "the chief wanted me to tell you something. The men you stopped tonight, they were hired. Someone put a bounty on Mr. Miles's head." Jonathan's expression hardened. "A bounty?" "Yes, sir," the officer replied. "We're still tracing the source, but it looks connected to a corporate rival." Jonathan's jaw tightened. Betrayal and anger flickered in his eyes, but before he could speak, Aisha stood up. "Then you'll need protection," she said simply. "These things don't end with one night." He looked at her, truly looked at her. Not as a maid, not even as a soldier, but as someone with integrity and courage beyond measure. "You said you wanted peace," Jonathan said quietly. "But maybe peace isn't about running away from your past. Maybe it's about finding a new way to use it." Aisha didn't answer right away. She turned toward the street, watching the dawn's first light break over the horizon. The world felt both familiar and new. "Maybe," she said softly, "maybe it's time I stop hiding." The camera, in visual storytelling terms, would fade on her face, calm but resolute, as the morning light touches her features. The woman the world had overlooked had finally stepped back into the light. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows of Miles Tech Tower, a symbol of modern power and precision, much like the man who built it. But today, Jonathan Miles wasn't the same man who had walked into that restaurant the night before. The attack had shaken something inside him, For years, he had built his empire on logic, efficiency, and control. Yet, in the moment when his life had hung by a thread, it wasn't his wealth nor his influence that saved him. It was a woman no one ever noticed, a maid. And that realization changed everything. He sat in his office on the top floor, looking out at the city skyline, lost in thought. The chaos of last night replayed in his mind, the gunshots, the screams, the blur of movement. And then her. The way Aisha moved, precise yet calm, brave yet humble. It was as if she had been born to protect, yet carried no pride in it. His assistant, Clara, knocked softly on the door. "Sir, the police report is finalized. They confirmed it. The attackers were hired by a rival firm. The investigation is ongoing." Jonathan nodded absently. "And the maid?" Clara hesitated. "Aisha, she resigned this morning, sir. She left before sunrise." Jonathan turned sharply. "Resigned?" "Yes, sir. She told the manager she didn't want attention. She said she was just doing what anyone should do." He leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "Anyone," he murmured, "but no one else did what she did." He stood abruptly, grabbing his jacket. "Prepare the car. I need to see her." Aisha lived in a small, modest apartment on the city's outskirts. The walls were bare, the furniture simple. A bed, a wooden chair, a table with a faded photo of a smiling man in uniform and a young boy beside him. The boy, her son, had his father's eyes, full of light and mischief. She was packing her things quietly. A few clothes, some old medals she had kept hidden, and a folded letter with a military insignia. When she heard the knock at the door, she hesitated. Then, with a quiet sigh, she opened it. Jonathan Miles stood there, impeccably dressed, but with a softness in his eyes that wasn't there before. "Mr. Miles," she said calmly, "you shouldn't have come here." He smiled faintly. "And yet, here I am." He stepped inside, glancing around. The simplicity of her home struck him deeply. There was no sign of luxury, no hint of the life of someone who had risked everything. "You were leaving?" he asked. Aisha folded her hands in front of her. "I don't belong in that world, sir. What happened at the restaurant was instinct. But I don't want to be remembered for violence. I want to live quietly." Jonathan looked at her, truly looked, as if trying to understand the layers she had spent years hiding behind. "Do you think saving lives is violence?" he asked softly. She didn't answer. He walked closer, lowering his voice. "Last night, you didn't just save me. You reminded me of something I lost. Faith. I built a company that runs on machines, data, and ambition, but I forgot what truly matters. Courage, loyalty, humanity." He reached into his pocket and handed her a document folder. Inside was a formal letter stamped with the Miles Tech Security Division insignia. "This," he said, "is a job offer. I want you to lead our corporate protection unit, train our staff, build a team. I don't want bodyguards who work for money. I want people who protect because it is right." Aisha blinked, surprised. "Me? I'm not." "You are exactly what we need," he interrupted gently. "You see danger before it happens. You act without hesitation. And most of all, you don't seek recognition. That's what true leadership looks like." She looked down at the papers, then at him. "Why me, Mr. Miles? You could hire anyone, former military, elite security firms." He smiled faintly. "Because they would protect my company. You protected people." There was silence for a moment. A silence heavy with meaning. Aisha sat down slowly, her eyes falling on the old photograph on the table, her husband and their little boy. She touched the frame softly. "He always said I was meant to lead," she murmured. "I didn't believe him back then." Jonathan followed her gaze, then said quietly, "Maybe now it's time to believe him again." Her lips trembled into a faint smile. For the first time in years, she felt something she had thought was gone forever. Purpose. "If I accept," she said finally, "I won't do it for titles or money. I'll do it because people deserve to feel safe." Jonathan nodded. "That's all I could ever ask for." The camera, in visual terms, would open on the Miles Tech headquarters weeks later. A sleek new sign reads, "Corporate Protection Division Director Aisha Rahman." Employees gather in admiration as she walks through the lobby in a formal suit, no longer the maid in a uniform, but a leader commanding respect. Her steps are calm, steady, confident. Jonathan watches from the balcony above, pride reflected in his eyes. As she passes the security training hall, a young recruit salutes her. "Ma'am, I read about what you did. You're a legend." Aisha smiles faintly. "Legends don't exist. Only people who do what's right when no one's watching." That evening, Jonathan stands by the same restaurant window where it all began, looking out at the city lights. The Sapphire Lounge has been restored, elegant once more. But for him, nothing about the world looks quite the same. He whispers to himself, "We measure wealth in money, but real wealth is the courage to stand up when everyone else hides." The camera pans upward to the city skyline, the same city that once ignored a maid, now watching her rise to greatness. It had been 6 months since that unforgettable night at the Sapphire Lounge. The night when 5 armed men stormed in to kill a billionaire and were stopped by a woman the world had never noticed. The city still remembered it. News outlets had called it the Sapphire Miracle. But Aisha never liked the attention. Whenever reporters asked for interviews, she declined politely. "I'm no hero," she would say quietly. "I just did what needed to be done." Yet, to those whose lives she saved, and to Jonathan Miles, she was more than a hero. She was a reminder that strength often hides behind humility, and greatness often comes from those least expected. The Miles Tech auditorium shimmered with lights and applause. Rows of employees, executives, and partners filled the hall. It was the company's annual recognition event, and at the center of the stage stood Jonathan Miles delivering his speech. "This year," he said, his voice steady, "we achieved record growth, expanded globally, and launched technologies that are changing the world. But our greatest achievement came not from innovation or profit, but from courage." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the audience until it landed on the woman seated quietly in the front row. Aisha Rahman. "6 months ago, I was nearly killed in an act of corporate sabotage. I survived because of someone who reminded me that real power doesn't come from wealth or fame. It comes from integrity, bravery, and compassion." He extended his hand toward her. "Please welcome the woman who redefined what leadership truly means, Director Aisha Rahman." The hall erupted into applause as Aisha stood, hesitant at first, then walking up the stage. She wore a navy blue uniform with a silver Miles Tech badge, dignified, calm, radiant with quiet confidence. Jonathan handed her a crystal award engraved with the words. As the applause continued, Aisha looked out at the crowd. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. For the first time, the world truly saw her. She spoke softly into the microphone. "I never expected to be here. I came to this city to start over, to forget a life that took more than it gave. But life has a way of testing whether you've really left your purpose behind. When danger came, I acted on instinct, not heroism. I only did what I was trained to do, protect." She paused, her eyes gentle but firm. "If there's one thing I've learned, it's that titles don't define who we are. The janitor, the maid, the driver, the waitress, they all matter. Every person you overlook might be carrying a story you'll never understand." Her voice deepened with emotion. "So treat people with respect. See them, not their uniforms, because sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest strength." The room fell silent. Then slowly, applause rose again. Not thunderous this time, but heartfelt. Jonathan smiled, his eyes glistening with pride. He knew those words would echo far beyond that hall. That evening, as the event ended and the guests departed, Jonathan and Aisha stood together on the balcony overlooking the glowing city. The wind carried a soft chill, and the city lights shimmered below like stars. Jonathan turned to her. "You know," he said with a faint smile, "I used to believe success was about being the smartest man in the room. But now I think it's about surrounding yourself with people who have the courage you lack." Aisha chuckled lightly. "Then you must have a very successful company now," he smiled, "only because of people like you." They stood in silence for a while, watching the world move beneath them. Cars rushing, people walking, the heartbeat of the city that had once ignored her. "Do you ever miss it?" Jonathan asked quietly. "The field, the missions?" She thought for a moment. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But now, I've found something better." "What's that?" She turned to him, eyes soft but strong. "Peace, the kind that comes not from hiding, but from doing what feels right." He nodded, understanding. Months later, a framed photo was hung in the Miles Tech headquarters lobby. A candid picture of Aisha standing beside new recruits in training. Below it, a small plaque read, "True power lies in humility. True leadership lies in courage." Every new employee who walked past that wall stopped to read those words. Some whispered her story in admiration. Others simply felt inspired, reminded that no job was small, no uniform insignificant. And somewhere, in the corner of that photograph, Aisha's quiet smile said everything words could not. That strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stands still and protects. In a world obsessed with status and success, we often overlook the ones who keep everything standing, the silent, the humble, the unseen. But sometimes it takes a single act of courage to remind us that greatness doesn't wear a suit or a title. It wears humility. Never underestimate the quiet ones, because when the moment comes, they might be the ones who save us all.